Good afternoon, Stephen.
Good afternoon, John.
So where are we, and was Nigel Farage correct on Thursday to turn down this offer of 40 paper seats from Boris?
Well, if you believe the polls and that the Conservative Party are now going to win this general election with a majority, whether that's a small majority or a large majority, then certainly I believe that the first stage of what people call Brexit, the leaving element under a Boris Johnson withdrawal agreement, is near. And so the 31st of January of 2020 will be hailed by the Conservative Day as a day of liberty, freedom and newborn democracy. I can hear the words of Boris Johnson myself. And part of that success story for the polls and for the Conservative Party is Nigel Farage's decision to withdraw his 317 Brexit Party candidates from those Conservative seats that they held or won in the last general election. Without a doubt, that is a game changer, as was shown in the markets. The currency markets rose, the headlines were very clear, and the Labour Party and other parties came out fulminating at the mouth how the parties now have fused, they're joined together, and then effectively a right-wing coup is occurring in Britain, which is all abject nonsense, as we know. But was Nigel right? Was he correct to withdraw those 317 votes? Well, if you believe that the Conservative Party has to win, that Brexit can only be achieved, or their Brexit can only be achieved under Boris Johnson, of course, it is the correct decision. But if you believe that there are people in this country who don't believe Boris Johnson is Brexit and should have been offered the opportunity to vote for an alternative, particularly an alternative that Nigel Farage had set out clearly in the weeks before, that Boris Johnson was simply Brino, that it was a disguise for remaining in the European Union. And it's a view that I agree with. I think we're actually moving to a free trade arrangement that actually encompasses the Norway EEA model in a free trade arrangement, which would mean that we're tied to the European Union forevermore.
So it's not Brexit under Boris. You do believe in what Farage said a couple of weeks ago, that this was Brexit in name only. So why the U-turn?
Well, I see it as a U-turn for him because of three factors. Firstly, Nigel, in his heart, has always been a Conservative, and the vast majority of his backers, financial backers, moral backers, and the people that take him places are Conservatives. And they've been screaming heavily at them that we can't allow Boris to lose in any circumstances, even if we lose Brexit, because of the threat of Jeremy Corbyn and his tax rises. And that's absolutely clear when you see people like Aaron Banks coming out backing a Conservative Party that, as you know, in the past, he has immensely criticised, said he would never back again, can never be trusted. And it's the fear of Jeremy Corbyn, more than actually having a proper Brexit. The morality and principle idea of Brexit has gone out the window to the fear that I'm going to lose money under Jeremy Corbyn. And I think Nigel has buckled to that pressure of friends, supporters and backers.
So, hang on, let me just clarify that. So you're saying Aaron Banks and the ilk are basically withdrawing their support because to them, in the end, it's their back pocket, it's the economy, stupid, that matters more than their political principles of being the bad boys of Brexit. That's what's going on? It's self-interest, is it?
I think it is self-interest because everyone's terrified of what Jeremy Corbyn can do in the tax and the economy. And so for them, that is a bigger fear than having a Brino Brexit. They can console themselves by saying that Boris has got us Brexit, or they can console themselves by saying that Boris at least gets us out of the European Union part one, namely there's no Parliament commissioners and we're not paying effectively money each year. But we don't really mind after that because it's over and we can say we've done our part. The reality is that even if there is a fudge, we'll still say it's Brexit but we're safe because we haven't got Corbyn.
Okay, understand that. But did you think that, and do you think there's a realistic chance that Corbyn would ever get a majority? He might get there by a hung parliament, but he's not going to be able to get into number 10 and put forward all those ridiculous sixth form policies, is he?
Well, first and foremost, Corbyn and the Labour Party are not likely to gain a majority. Firstly, England is going to vote predominantly Conservative, as it has done for many, many years. And he is reliant on the cities and the large populations of Liverpool and Manchester, Leeds and London, to an extent Bristol and a few other cities in parts of Birmingham. But that mass across the north, from Liverpool across the coast, is where they get their huge amount of votes. But that's not enough for him to get a majority. He needs, as he has done in the past, needs to succeed extremely well in Wales and in Scotland. The SNP weakened in Scotland, yes, but are not enough to throw enough votes for the Labour Party. And I think the Liberal Dems might pick up a few as well. In Wales, yes, there is an element of resurgency of the Labour Party, particularly with the collapse of firstly UKIP and now the Brexit Party. And those voters there are wedded to the idea of not voting to the Conservative Party, apart from a few constituencies. So the Lib Dems and Labour will rise there. But again, added together, that's not enough. So the only way you could gain power is through some form of coalition with these other political parties. And that, therefore, in my view, leads to two things on his policies. Firstly, he isn't going to get all the policies through that he wants, because many in the coalition are traditional, straight down the line, Oxford Union, elitist politicians who are terrified of any fundamental change, whether it's offered by Corbyn or whether it's offered by Brexit. They just like the status quo. And it's a kind of elemental snobbery that sits at the comfortable element of our society. And the second part is that Corbyn believes he will stay in the European Union under a customs union. And if he honestly thinks that he'll be able to privatise parts of our national railway or water or electricity industries, which are owned by the French and the Germans, and the European Union is going to allow that under their rules, he is barking mad. Some say he already is. There's not a chance that the European Union, once Britain's in, is going to allow him anywhere near the opportunity to do the things he wants to do. It's stupid politics. So that's why I don't fear Corbyn in as many ways as other people do.
Do you fear, though, this Remainer alliance? Because basically it's not going to be red versus blue, is it? It's going to be alliances in a way. And do you think Nigel Farage feared that?
It's possible that he feared that. I mean, I don't generally fear the Remainer alliance at all. I think most of this agreement between the Lib Dems, Greens and Plaid Cymru, when you look at the seats that they fought, and they've decided to divvy up amongst themselves many of the ones that they already won in the first instance. And so they're simply securing those seats.
Okay.
Secondly, I just don't think there's enough of a Remainer alliance in some of these areas for them to win. Do I think the Lib Dems will increase a little bit? Yeah, maybe 40, 45 seats, but that's not enough for them to make any influence at all.
So then let's go back to Nigel Farage then. So the money men are being motivated by self-interest. Will he, you know him well, will he feel let down by those money men, or is he after the peerage? He says he's turned it down. Is he after getting in there to be the US ambassador in a future Conservative government? What's his game plan now?
Well, the first game plan for Nigel always has been his name in history. Where will it sit in the history books? Will he be seen as the person that drove Brexit through? And he doesn't want to be damaged by the potential title that by having Brexit stop the Conservative Party, he became not the man that gave Brexit, the man that took Brexit away.
That's a brilliant point. Brilliant point.
That's the most fundamental element to him. But that then feeds into his future direction. Of course, at the moment in the United States, under Trump, and if Trump wins again, it'll continue. He is the man of Brexit, and he makes a substantial income from the touring and from the interviews that he makes in the United States. And losing that crown would be a tremendous loss for himself. Does he want the House of Lords? I suspect he does, but by accepting it would create a dilemma. a dilemma that I believe he would overcome, in that, having said he doesn't want to be part of the elites, he's suddenly part of it. But there are those in the Brexit Party that many would argue, and I think having met them personally, my feeling is that Richard Tice and John Longworth would snap up in an instant being offered a membership of the House of Lords. For them, that is their kind of historical goal to pass down to their family and friends. And of course, if Nigel did get a membership of the House of Lords, his income in the United States would shoot up like nothing that we've known.
Yeah, but what he doesn't want to do is lose the Brexit crown, I presume, to Boris Johnson.
I think that's far more important on a personal level. And so by doing what he's done so far, at least he's retaining the credibility that he wasn't trying to undermine Brexit and he gave the Conservative Party a chance. But in doing so, I believe fundamentally he has effectively killed the Brexit revolution in this country that started a good 10, 15 years ago. Just like the Levellers, the Diggers and the Chartists, their movements all came to an end. Our Brexit revolution to change politics for good as they want is over. And we'll return very quickly now, within the next couple of years, to Labour versus Conservative going forward.
OK, because it was always more than just Brexit, wasn't it? Just like the last European election. It was more. It was a dissatisfaction with the status quo. I take your point on that. But tell me about Nigel Farage then going forward. He has been offered this week to have paper candidates put up against him by Boris, a last-minute intervention, of course, and he's turned that down. Was he right to turn that down? And why hasn't Boris compromised more? Because giving away 317 constituencies was quite a big gesture, whichever way you look at it, by Mr Farage.
Boris doesn't need to compromise. He's got the pressure and he's already won the first round. So the interest to us is really, as we all know in politics, there are deeper deals that are done behind the scenes before anyone offers this. Sometimes it's just pure pressure and the fear of being seen badly in the public eye. And that could have been the main reason for the 317 candidates being withdrawn, as I've already indicated. But often, as we heard from Aaron Banks, he said that Andrew Reid had pulled together a deal for the Conservative Party, a level of compromise that was acceptable to them. Aaron Banks is a deal maker. Politics is about deals. Richard Tice is about deals. So I suspect that somewhere along the line there has to be a deal, or something's gone on. It'd be naive of us not to think so. But
although they're denying it, aren't they? Both sides are denying it, but you think a deal has happened.
Well, everyone always denies it until later on in history we find out something else has actually occurred. So we'll see down the line whether it's a weaker candidacy or no campaigning in Richard Tice's Hartlepool seat. Fascinating that, as I understand it, could be wrong here, that I understand that a candidate had already been selected for Hartlepool.
He stood down unilaterally, yeah.
And he was effectively stood down so that he could be replaced by Tice. Why is that all of a sudden? Is that part of the deal to allow Tice to become elected as an MP? Little campaigning from the Conservative Party, put up an effective paper candidate? I don't know. Maybe that's the opportunity that's been offered there. But at the end of the day, Boris doesn't need to do this, and there are many in his party who say, don't do any more. Let's just crush the Brexit Party. We've got them on the run. We can see them in our sights. Just as we managed to help mangle UKIP, we can get this out of the way and we're back to business as usual. So buy off the last remnants of the top people, let all the others disappear and they'll float back to us. That's what they believed in 17. To an extent, it's helping in 19.
Thanks very much indeed. That's Stephen Woolfe, former UKIP MEP, of course, a leading Brexiteer. We're going to go on and talk more about this in a moment. Stephen Woolfe, the leading Brexiteer. Stephen, just talking there about Nigel Farage and people being let down, do you have a lot of feelings for the prospective parliamentary candidates who basically have not only lost money, they've lost ego, they've lost reputation, and they got stood down, not even by text, they got stood down on live telly by Nigel Farage?
I do feel sorry for a vast number of them because they have been treated abysmally, but that was probably obvious from the start. At the end of the day, they weren't members with a members' vote. They were just effectively associates who chipped in a bit of money to help the branding of those individuals who became MEPs. And they've been sold down the river if they'd have watched the history of UKIP, they'd have realised that was going to happen to them anyway. They've spent money not only in the application forms of £100, I think, but many of them had to travel to London and other parts to have their interviews at cost. Some have contributed money to campaigns to get them underway. So financially, none of them are going to get it back. And they've been dealt a particularly hard and ruthless part of party politics, which is that they are dispensable, just as the voters are. On the other side, I've already noticed that a large number of the younger and some of the more experienced Brexit Party candidates, who are always seen to be Conservatives, because that's the way that the Tice Farage Brexit Party had branded itself, and how people see it, as particularly now, as a sub-party of the Conservative Party, have quickly moved to support and back the Conservative Party. And already they are manoeuvring themselves in the hope that they will get jobs as assistants or councillors and become part of the future Conservative Party establishment. They too can see that the Brexit revolution is over and the two-party state has returned. So if they want to have a financial or political interest in it, it's best to get their hands on it now.
Okay, so what about the general public? I mean, are you happy with these kind of deals where in some constituencies, I mean, for example, even Nigel in Orpington, he won't be able to vote for the Brexit Party because there is no longer a Brexit candidate. But right across the political spectrum, are you comfortable with parties standing down candidates to give another party a better chance? The Greens are up to it, etc., etc. I don't know, to me, it's a bit of an affront to democracy.
Well, we've been seeing an affront to democracy since 2016, and actually slightly before that, John. I mean, this is part of a historical modern characterization of our modern democracies. That is that, on the one hand, parties and politicians have been saying one thing in manifestos and then abjectly ignoring them. There are those people who voted specifically for certain policies only to see the actual opposite happen. So for me, it isn't surprising that we've got to the stage that, having had the largest public vote in our history go against them, they then spent 3 years coming up to damaging it, delaying it, and hopefully denying it. But now the next station is to turn around and say, we'll withdraw our candidates so you can't even vote for them. They have no respect for voters. They have respect only for their own narrow interests, the interests of their narrow backers and supporters, and the interests of this rather larger globalist ideal in the cases of the Remainers, that nation states shouldn't exist. It should be larger global organisations such as the United Nations and the European Union that merely dictate downwards, and they are the mouthpieces of those dictatorships.
Another reason why we need PR, would you say?
PR has its benefits. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to have the PR system that we see in the European states. I mean, without a doubt, that entrenches and solidifies this boring, dull, and actually elitist consensus. You see that in Germany for a long time, where effectively all the political parties, Socialist, Green, and the so-called Conservative Party, have all been sharing power in one way or another and actually do exactly the same thing. And people say, oh, there's huge amounts of benefits in consensus, but actually it just keeps things the same. There are models of proportional representation that are interesting, where you manage to maintain an individual MP, and that's great because that creates a fear factor. The only thing that politicians fear the most is losing their job. And if you have an opportunity, every politician has literally got to be in a proportional representation position that they can lose their job every 4 years. Without that, then you don't have true democracy. Then they'll listen to you.
OK, so after all that then, what do you think the turnout's going to be like?
I think it'd be around the average, because there's got to be some people out there who feel that there's no longer a point in voting. One of the key and important democratic success stories of the rise of UKIP and the 2014 and 2019 European elections, and of course the referendum, was that there were millions of people in this country, as we saw through our own statistics, that had given up on our democratic process. They'd recognised that the two-party, same university, same speaking, same looking consensus politicians were actually having the same politics, and it didn't matter what they did or said, they were always going to be ignored, felt that they come out and vote. Now that they've seen how the elites have really trampled on that, and in this election are ignoring them once again and saying, your vote is pointless. You are worthless unless you do as we tell you. Many of them, I think, will start to retract to that original position and stop voting. I mean, I'm one of them. Who can I vote for in Winchester? I have a Liberal Democrat who's likely to win and a truly slippery and slimy, in my opinion, Conservative MP who backed the government in 17 and said he would abide by the referendum, abjectly opposed that and campaigned for the opposite, was withdrawn the whip by the Conservatives, restored it, and now I'm told he's going to actually back the Brexit because he's been put back in his box. I'm sorry, I have no one. So my principle is to say don't vote, even though I know that my grandfather and many others died for that. But they didn't die or fight for the type of democracy that we have today. They fought for something much more principled in which they believed they would have fundamental change. I'm not getting that fundamental change.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a feeding frenzy within the Westminster bubble and the 24-hour news cycle, whether it's Sky News or whether it's the BBC, and they think that people really care. I don't really think they do. There was a survey out when they asked, do you remember this incident in the election campaign or that incident? And people say no. And I think you're right. The death of Brexit, as you characterise it, perhaps this is the death of politics, the death even of democracy. People will just go, I ain't going to vote for them. Because like today, they've been using the floods. They've got these spending pledges. They've got this immigration up today. But I don't know whether people are actually paying attention anymore. And Farage's capitulation, if you want to look at it that way, characterise it that way, only adds to that, doesn't it?
Well, Farage, unfortunately, has a huge number of advisors around him. Many of them have been pretty accurate in the past, but never really advised him properly, in my view, that he could have been much greater than he is today by forming the political party in UKIP and actually really considering taking that political party on into new directions. There was always a resistance to that because it was felt that no one really wanted to take on the Conservatives because that was it. And that's where some of the big battles of 14, 15, 16 came in. And that's gone now. That would have been his major part in history, with actually really pushing on. Because just think where we are now. If he had decided not to leave in 16 and stay, or he had decided to come out and back the right people in the elections, which he didn't after he'd gone, and which have thrown in success stories, many people realise that UKIP would have carried on and been a much more significant force today. That has gone. And the Brexit revolution is over.
OK, good. Well, not good, but I understand your point. Got to wrap in a second. So you think Boris will get in. It'll be a small majority. But where will British politics be? You think it's the end of the Brexit revolution, which is a depressing thought, but I think I agree with you. So where next then? 30, 40 seconds. Tell me.
Boris will win. A small majority, a fight. We leave the European Union heralded as the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then sometime in January, February next year, people will say, oh, it's back to normal.
And on that note, we'll leave it. Stephen Woolf, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Stephen Woolf, former MEP and, of course, member of UKIP and, of course, a leading Brexiteer. What do you make of that?